So this is one person's view of what was said at that table. And a lot of things were said. So I'm going to try to present something, but inevitably it will be my bias with my own personal views here. We talked a lot about long-term sustainability. So if there were to be a project in that combined cyber GIS with geodesign, one strong argument we felt for the use of cyber GIS in that context would be long-term sustainability. And just as an example, if we were to take the impact of World Trade Center 9/11, a huge amount of data, analytic methods, data models were created very quickly, within hours of the disaster on Pier 92 or wherever it was. And all of that then disappeared. Try to find the data model that was used. With Katrina, it's a little bit better. Louisiana State did some work to preserve afterwards what they had created. But there's a real issue here. Right? So that led us to suppose that a very valuable thing to do would be along the lines of Digital City or Digital Earth to create a cyber GIS scale platform for geodesign within a community. If that were done, the main issues appear to be more political than anything else. How do you persuade the existing powers that be to share data to that level of intensity? How do you make it a collaboration between, do you do this at the county level, do you do it at the neighborhood level, do you do it informally at the community level, what? So this is one possible proposal. Right? As with any such proposal, I think there is an issue which will always surface in all of this and surfaced this morning, and that is how to balance the technical questions with the substantive ones. How do we engage in cyber GIS without being swallowed by its technological issues? And we can look at many, many presentations in this kind of community where one could argue that the technology issues have overwhelmed the substantive ones. How do we balance them? How do we become experts in Hadoop and at the same time make a substantial contribution to geodesign? That's a huge, huge issue. And I think looking at it from the outside, if we were to place ourselves in the position of designers who would like to adopt geodesign and cyber GIS, their equation is very simple. The benefits of doing so have to outweigh the costs. And right now, the costs of acquiring that new technology are enormous. How do I very quickly enable myself to use cyber GIS without going through a massive learning curve of acquiring the technology? The technology needs to be stable, it needs to be simple, it needs to be arguably simpler than what it's replacing, which is standard GIS, if you like. So that, to me, that's kind of a personal statement anyway, rather than something that came out of the discussion. But that, to me, is the answer to number 3, the challenge. Or let me suggest really 2 challenges. One is the political issue of how to build something at the cyber GIS scale for geodesign in a very political context. And the other is the balance between technology and substance.
Thank you.
Please, what would you like?
Other comments?
Yeah, we're going to ask that. Just to amplify that. One interesting thing about the geodesign framework is that, as you know, it comes in 2 chunks. Your representation, your process diagrams, and your evaluation diagrams are something that any planning process in a region all needs to access. But you might have many different planning processes, some of big scale, some of small scale. So when you think about what the framework is, to have a long-term, long-lived sharing of data and models that's managed, let's say, by the city of Seattle, that's available to anybody, whether you're doing a local neighborhood planning or you're going to do some large transportation planning. The first 3 steps, there's things that we could do would be very well supported by cyber GIS. And then to answer, to talk to Mike's idea about how do you make it simple then, if Rishi's tool could then simply tie into those already existing, well-tested, ongoing models for evaluation models, then all you really have to do, what you really do then is you're focusing on the people about what design changes do you want to make and how do you want to think about those design changes. And that can be decoupled from the first 3 steps to an extent. So because every time I've been involved in any type of geodesign effort, we've always started from scratch and always try to build out all the assessment levels over and over again. That's part of what makes it so expensive. If we had a CyberGIS platform, which not only is the data cataloged and accessible and findable, but also the models there. The hydro models are already running. I can run them anytime, test them with my own tweaks to them. To build such an infrastructure, as Mike was saying, that's expensive. It takes a lot of computing power, and it takes a long-term commitment. And how do But I think it's what we got to start doing. That's the sort of Mike was saying. That's the sort of the concept of digital Earth. To have digital Seattle, where all of the evaluation models are always up there. Anytime, day or night, you can test. How walkable is my neighborhood? Let me try. Let me just check that again. So that we can decouple slightly the parts that make up geodesign and put the ones that need power and need long and huge amounts of data in the right environment, so that the people who want to think about change don't have to start from scratch and can actually move very quickly.
But I wanted to build on the first point that Mike said about technology swallowing the substantive. And not just swallowing the substantive, and this is what Ikuno remarked to me as she was leaving. She said, y'all are way ahead of us. I'm just a practitioner. I mean, those are the people on the ground doing the work. And we're nowhere near using this technology. And I think, keeping that in mind, that in some ways, certainly everyone's using a computer in some way and they're talking to each other, but that we don't want to greatly outstrip people's capacity to use the technology and desire to use the technology and ability to use the technology. So a different kind of digital divide, really, than one that's already talked about in the literature. So I feel that as well, and I know several designers, and they do use CAD, but adding many, many more dimensions is overwhelming. So I think that just keeping in mind that the pace, Roger is wonderful, but we're greatly outpacing the uptake of this already. And maybe it's because it needs to be simplified more, and it needs to be made more usable, and so we have time to do that before people are even ready to do it. Robert's point is that we started directly with the software, and he felt that we skipped the step of spatial thinking with paper and pencil, and and this goes to the point you were making before with, well, we have 2D, but what about other types of information that needs to be integrated? And I think understanding that a CyberGIS and geodesign in a CyberGIS probably will not encompass, should not encompass, cannot encompass every aspect of the design process or the thinking process for that matter. But your point, Philip, was well taken. And even in the preparation for this workshop, you read reports all the time, and you know they use a great model for that, but all you have is the static PDF map of the output. And you're like, well, it'd be really great if I could just tap into that model, So that is a benefit of CyberGIS, that I think if the infrastructure was there and the maintenance and the management of it was there, the commitment to do that, the enterprise GIS approach, I think that would be real progress and may lead to more uptake. But the spatial thinking and some of the kind of preliminary work may still need to be done on paper and pencil, and the geodesign workshop could maybe still incorporate that, some of that early, the analog approaches before switching to the computer, to get people in the mode of thinking before getting them overwhelmed by a tool. Not that your tool is overwhelming, but just in general. So I think that just broadening our understanding of what CyberGIS and geodesign is, and that it's not all going to be on a computer and in a computer. Robert made also a good point drawing on a textbook of Mike's and et al., Longley, so forth, that, he said, well, that textbook says in GIS we have 2 kinds of models, representation and process, and then process there's static and dynamic. And he said, well, what about the rest of the models? I said, well, some of the rest of the models are just variations of the second half of models are really variations on the first half. The evaluation adds the value judgment. And then that raised the point of, well, what do we need CyberGIS for value? That's human, that's the human dimension. And so I think creating a better understanding of how much of a model is analytic and how much of it is deliberative And some are more analytic, and some have more of the value judgment component, the deliberative part, although there is a deliberation in what you even represent. But I think that was the direction of our conversation, is thinking about supporting both analysis and deliberation and participation, of course, because of who we are, and doing that in a cyber GIS environment that still supports kind of people's natural way of interacting. And structured participation isn't necessarily our natural way of interacting. We're messy, we interrupt each other, So I think strengthening the systems, but also making them more relaxed is maybe an outcome of that thought. So I think we also went, of course, into, Suzanne really focused on, well, why do we even need a cyber GIS? Our problems are, what we focus on may not need that scale of computing. And then we started, of course, brainstorming about what does need that scale of computing. And not just real-time streaming data, but not a snapshot of data from 2010, but something that can be constantly, we're always building new buildings. Actually, the building footprint could always be up to date if it was just dynamically updated with constant information of inhabitants or their movement patterns based on their tweets. I think are changing our idea of what real time means and expanding that not just from streaming data to physical in the world data and social data, social demographic data, and then overlaying those things and doing analysis on them. That gets us to a cyber GIS. So we're not always working with static snapshots of information and models at one time, but that those two are dynamic. So I think that was where we were just trying to think of the first question of geodesign and cyber GIS and why a cyber GIS for that. Did I leave out something really important to you? And I'm sorry if that's not more structured. I need more time to do that. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So Tim and Rishi and I talked about a lot of different things in our time. I'm going to try to summarize as best as I can. So if I leave anything out, please jump in. We talked about sustainability as well and thought about what might be some of the subjects for a new grant proposal along these lines. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about the educational opportunities for that. Education is a component in almost, I don't know, is it required for all NSF grants essentially to have the educational component now? I personally, I don't mean to be too cynical, I have seen a lot of very trivial educational engagements, and I think that this requires a much deeper educational engagement to get it right, because of all the questions involved, such as supporting diverse audiences of different age groups, different spatial literacies, which some of you have touched on already. So one challenge towards that is to find an appropriate educational specialist, and there's these examples at many different campuses. Someone not just to check off the box of, hey, we have an educational specialist in the grant, but someone who could really help us find the most substantive engagements to make some progress on these fronts. We also talked about the potential of running some of the models on something like Roger in a cluster supercomputing environment. Carl talked about the ability to run many different versions of the change models to judge the impacts, all in combinations. You could do almost every iteration in combination and get an idea of how they can interact in a way that wouldn't be practical to do sort of interactively overlay all the sheets of Mylar on top of each other to see how that works. So we could look at finding some good examples of which models would be most beneficial to get running in the short term, and find some specialists either at University of Illinois or some close collaborators who can help us get it integrated on the system in a high performance way, and then look at integrating that into the geodesign study software and getting that as a piece that could be interacted with. Also, as well as the high performance modeling part, integrating with other existing services like, say, the Esri Geo Enrichment to bring in all the relevant data that might be underlying some of our sketches or in the local context. But a key challenge with that is not just the technical integration, but the design as well, so doing it without data overload, and also making that information available, whether it's that specific functionality or other analytical capabilities, available to the right kinds of users at the right stage in the process. so that maybe the geodesign framework supports a lot of deep analysis, but you don't overwhelm perhaps the general public with all of the bells and whistles if that's not necessary. Did I agree with that?
I will discuss the wide variety of things, not necessarily related to the actual problem, but there are a few thoughts that we had. So, CyberGIS basically fundamentally is specialized hardware for geocomputation in a sense, right? So you have something. So when you use that, when you have lots of data or some very big problem that runs for a long time, or when you have a lot of users, right? And then how does this now relate to geo design? And I think that lots of users, you guys talked already about this, so if a whole city starts in a geodesign process, you may actually hit limits very quickly. And that led me actually to a question that I had for Rishi, which is, you said you have one server that does all of this. Does that server also do all the intersections and all the things? So there we go. So because I tried that and I couldn't make it work, I'm like, this is awesome if you could have figured this out. But okay, so there is actually more infrastructure behind this which does these kinds of things.
It happens in the browser. It happens.
Oh, you do it all in the, oh yeah, you upload it in the other direction, that makes sense. But you could also upload it onto a cluster, which would be a CyberGIS infrastructure type thing, right? In addition, if you look at more complex problems, I feel, so if I look at the geodesign thing, I think one thing that we had, and we discussed this earlier, is kind of the step from sketch to the models, that you have a lot of uncertainty and how to kind of resolve that step and make that work. I think that could be one viable punchline. And if you go into models and you start, let's say you just start drawing, I think it's the feedback that allows you the evaluation. You guys talked about that, right? And that could be on the fly, which brings me to the point of it has to be fast. So a traditional cyber infrastructure, I actually very much enjoy that you talked about also the cluster, not being a cluster, but being a cloud. Because if I have to batch schedule everything and I'm in a meeting like this and I click a button and it says, come back in half hour, you know, what good does that do for me, right? So I think we need to rethink also the cyber infrastructure that supports these kinds of tasks in a seamless way. And I'm very glad to hear that you're actually doing that, because the cluster that we're running is on demand. We actually don't batch schedule. We run it right away, but we have enough nodes for our small team to do that. If you do this in a larger group, then suddenly you have these problems. So, and I think in a process, the turnaround times should not be more than 10 seconds, and that's a real challenge for a cluster, I would argue. And by 10 seconds, actually, you can see this on a table when you discuss something, right? And the discussion stops somehow, and then you start counting in your head. I doubt you will get longer than 7 seconds. Somebody will say something. So there's a kind of, if humans, we just don't deal well with that. If you're in a conversation and you work on a problem, it's like, oh yeah, let this calculate, we focus on something else. The focus on what you actually talked about is lost. And in geodesign, I can see that kind of interaction being very important in the design process. The turnaround time is fast enough. So I can see a piece of CyberGIS supporting that.
So I didn't hear anything about a comment that I had made that is in the conversation and so on. So is design an analytic act or a deliberative act? Or neither of the two? Or both?
Both.
Okay. Is both cheating? In terms of, say, well, it's just analytic and deliberative. Okay. I suppose a parting thought is what it was, because it really does blow a whole lot of things out of the water for the National Academy of Sciences in terms of what they believe decision making is. All of this analytic deliberative stuff, I should have said, was on the basis of large stakeholder groups getting together to solve complex problems. The whole motivation is complex problems are out there, lots and lots of people, diverse groups, stakeholder groups and so on, technical specialists as it would be, the decision makers, the authority, all of these different renderings of these are people in the world. These are the social groups that exist in the world, social meaning are people of different character as it would be, to come to the table as it would be. So is it possible to say, well, we should all look at that literature and design is really not that necessary per se? Because we haven't done design and all of the analytic deliberative research that's been done, I don't believe we've done, because I would contend that design is the innovation. Design is the creative act. But not only the creative act, but the synthetic act as well. I'm not sure that deliberation is the synthetic act. I don't think analytic is the synthetic act. And so this idea of synthesis is really a new horizon for science here, I think, coming forward. Human science, natural science, and so on, just to better understand the character of complex systems through synthesis. But I suppose only time will tell in terms of the work that people do and the way that we get on with that. I'd like to thank you all for being in the Friday session of this workshop, and look forward to seeing any of the materials that you might have. If you want to send me materials so that I can help synthesize those into the report that I'll be providing Xiaowen Wang and the executive committee, the senior advisor on the Cyber GIS project, and then play it back to all of the people who participated in the workshop. So again, once again, a sunny day before noon. Finish early, 3 minutes, right? And we're out of here. Well, thanks very much.